what the purpose is of it. In the past, the MVCD students used to do an exhibit locally, but the goal for this symposium was to get the work disseminated nationally, maybe internationally, expose the students to some professional networking, and for them to talk on stage professionally, which is an activity that we do a lot as designers. And so we wanted to give the students the opportunity to do this kind of symposium as an experience, as a culminating experience to a full year of work and research that they've done for their capstone. Today, we're going to have 3 sections. The first one, each section will consist of 3 students and one of our acclaimed keynote speakers. And each student gets to present for 15 minutes, and then we switch out to the second student, the third student, and then we'll have a 30-minute student panel led by the keynote speaker, who will then speak at the end for about 45 minutes and take Q&A. And then we'll switch to the next section. A couple of housekeeping things. As you've seen, we got some snacks and water up front. The restrooms are just down the hall, past the elevators on your right. And we would like to ask you guys to turn off your cell phones so to not disturb the speakers. I'll give it over to Danielle.
Yeah, we want to thank everybody who's here for coming and everybody who's watching on YouTube. We also want to thank the Mix Center for hosting us. This is, I think, the first public event that is happening at the Mix Center that students are running in this room. We want to also thank the Design School and the director of the Design School, Paola Sanguinetti, for supporting this project. The Visual Communication Design Program, Venture Cafe, our 9 graduate capstone presenters, our 3 amazing keynote speakers, Terresa Moses, George I, and April Greiman. Our first session is going to begin with our first 3 students, Dagny Paulsen, Yajun Beatrice Guo, Yuxin Chin, followed by the Q&A. Let's get this show on the road.
Yay. Give it up for the students.
Thank you.
All right. Line the light.
You're good.
What? I got it. Hello, everyone. I'm going to start today out with a few questions. So I want you to think about your closest friendship. Do they increase your sense of belonging and your self-worth? Do they reduce your stress and increase your happiness? Do they help you cope with traumas such as illness or job loss? Hi, my name is Dagny Paulsen, and today I'm going to be talking to you about friendship and human connection. I used to consider myself an extreme extrovert, and in undergrad of college, it was really easy for me to make new friends and connect with others. And then COVID hit, and post-COVID, I feel like I've become a lot more introverted and more anxious around meeting new people, hanging out with new people, and strengthening my deeper connections. And according to the American Psychological Association, there's been a 5% increase in loneliness in people. And some of the benefits of friendship include friendships ground us, and they keep things in perspective, and they help us manage life's problems. But I wanted to look into what friendship has meant historically. So I looked into different philosophers, and starting out with Plato. Plato believed that we're social creatures and political creatures, and that friendships only really exist as a defense mechanism, and that we have enemies, and so we're trying to protect ourselves. And then Aristotle believed that there are 3 different types of friendship, that there is mutual admiration, mutual pleasure, and mutual advantage. And to have a true friendship, there is 3 different conditions. One being that you're another person of equal standing, that you're an adult, that you communicate with each other. Next up, I looked into Cicero, and and he believed that friendship can have a greater tie than those of family, and basically that conditions for true friendship are so rare that only a few people will find somebody that they can consider their second half. The next person I looked into was Nietzsche, and he believed in goal-oriented friendship, that people are basically only friends, so they can both be, they can strive together. The next person I looked into was Hannah Arendt. She believed in this 2-in-1, which is that a friendship is two individuals coming together as one, and you're both kind of yourself still, but you're now one entity. The next I looked into Dean Cocking and Jeanette Kennett, and they believed in mutual drawing, which is our interests, self-conception, and character are influenced by our friends. So then after looking into all of these historical people, I wanted to look into what friendship meant to me. I came up with my own definition. And so my definition is friendship is more about what's on the inside and how you feel with others. It doesn't matter your background, your race, your sexual orientation, age. It's just about the connection you have with them. And you both have to put in equal effort to be good friends. And then I also came up with different levels of friendship. So there's the people who is your chosen family, which are people that are basically you consider your family, but they might not be your blood, all the way down to known stranger, which is somebody who you know of, but you don't really know well, and then stranger. From that, I went into doing a survey, and the survey I got mostly female, ages 22 to 30, mostly Caucasian, and they were in their bachelor's or master's, and then or employed full time, and then most didn't have a disability. And from the survey, I learned that most people met their friends in college. So then I went into interviewing people who had either were in grad school or had a job. So I interviewed these people. And from that, I learned that you need to put yourself in the presence of new people to make friends, and that not everybody is kind of meant to be friends with each other. So it's okay if it doesn't work out, and that you build relationships through conversation. So what I took from this is I wanted to create an environment where you can interact with others, you can gain a connection, you can make friends from it. And I wanted to look into what already existed. So what already exists in the world right now is there was a couple games. There's We're Not Really Strangers and Where Should We Begin? And there's also a couple apps, which is like Bumble, BFF, Meetup, and Let Me Know. But all of these things didn't really account for serendipity and spontaneity. So my goals for my project were to do a spontaneous, serendipitous, fun kind of interaction situation. So what I came up with is I came up with this idea of you'd have posters that would be around. For this example, it'd be Tempe, and you'd have these posters hanging around, and they'd have different challenges on them. So you would have like a QR code, and you could scan it on your phone, and it would give you a challenge. Like, for example, one would be in a coffee shop, and it'd be like, buy the next person coffee and have a conversation with them or whatever. So these are the 3 examples of posters that I came up with. And then this is an example of how it would work is you'd find the poster, you could go and you would scan it. And then when you have it in view, it would give you the challenge. So this one would be, what's the best part of your day so far? And then you would also have a landing page. And so here's my landing page of kind of the background of my project. So you'd be able to look at, this is how it would work. It'd be different tab pages. And then you go into like, it goes through the background of my project. So benefits of friendship, you'd scroll down and you could read all about the benefits of friendship here. Yeah, I went really slow. And then it would go into the background of the history of friendship. So that would go over the philosophers. And so on the computer, you would just hover over the philosophers, but on your phone, you click and you can view their different views. So again, you'd be able to, like, that would be Plato or whoever you go over, and it showed their opinions about friendship. And then next, it would go over the importance of friendship. So it would give out some of the interview answers that I got. So I asked, what do you think the most important thing about friendship is? And so I have some of the things like mutual care and respect towards each other, or, being considerate of people's feelings, and the bond that you share. And then finally, you would go over the challenge. So it would talk about how there has been a 5% increase of loneliness, and then what I'm doing to change it. So around Tempe, you'll see posters, complete the challenge, scan the QR code, and then at the end, it has an option to download the posters if you want to do it in your own city, or you can suggest new challenges. So that is the landing page to kind of go over the project. And then the next steps would be doing user testing and then tracking the insights from that user testing, and then get funding so that I can actually implement it in Tempe or wherever the city is. Thank you. Next up is Beatrice, or Yajun Beatrice Gua.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 2023 RIPPLE Symposium today. It is a great honor of mine presenting my design work today. I would love to share some of the lessons that I learned through my journey in Arizona, my own exploration of the nature, and also some design reflection of mine today. My name is Yajun Beatrice Guo. Before I start, I would like to introduce some background of mine. I became a professional graphic designer 3 years ago and enrolled in this program. Before that, I was a study advisor teaching students learning English as a second language, and I also majored in educational psychology. 3 years ago, 2019, in August, which is the hottest time of Arizona, I moved from Tianjin, China, to here, Tempe, Phoenix. And that is the moment that my life changes 180 degree. The right part is where I used to be. That is my hometown, where I get used to cycling around the city all the time and feel the city view, try to explore the city view through the public transportation. But after moving here, everything changed. The hot temperature stops me from riding the bicycle all year long, as well as the public transportation still building. So there has been a great change, both physically and mentally, of mine. I'm learning how to live in this new city, as well as how to find myself again here, like how I can define myself here again in Arizona. And then, unfortunately, COVID hits. So all of us has been experienced that hard time. And that is also the moment that I chose to enroll in the graphic design program. So I've experienced a new way of learning called online learning, to have the online studio. As a person who have no studio experience in learning graphic design or arts, it is a huge booming to me in understanding the new isms, all kinds of isms, like just rushing into my mind. And that is the moment was really excited because finally I put everything on the right track and helping me to become a graphic designer. But at the same time, who am I exactly among those isms? What isms am I? And why I feel running out of inspirations constantly. So with all kinds of concern, this is basically my mental health time, like daily. Even though people are speaking around me all the time, I don't actually understand because they are English. That's my second language. And I was surrounded by textures, typographies, shapes, but I sort of kind of lost myself during this process. Fortunately, after a year and a half, everything started to back on the right track and we went back to studio face to face. And for me, another new journey begins because I chose to enroll a class called biomimicry in design because I've always been a huge lover of natural elements and botanical elements. So I'm interested in learning the botanical features and also how I can incorporate the local design inspirations to my own design work. So during that class, instead of sitting in the studio and doing the brainstorming, we were encouraged to step outside to explore the natural environment around us. Before jumping into the conclusion, see first, observe first, and then to analyze the mechanism behind those next. And in the end, come up with your own design ideas. So for me, that is a new way to do the design. And from then on, I getting pretty interested in this idea of embedding the biomimicry and try to see what I can do to apply this very sustainable way of doing design. So this is where I am. I started to grab my sketchbook, my pencils, and then take the camera, go outside, try to feel Arizona, try to re-know my living environment again. And from now on, I'm going to introduce more of the local environment here called Sinnar Desert and how the local species survived in the Sinnar Desert. So the life principles are the deep patterns that has been repeatedly tested by the ecosystem and also the organism to survive, adapt, and finally succeeded in thrive in this planet. There are 6 overarching life principles. We also call that biomimicry life principles that supports the organism to survive. And that is how nature adapt to the constant changing of the environment and the situation and survive in this planet. So 6 of them are adapt to changing conditions, be resource efficient, use life-friendly chemistry, be locally attuned and responsive, integrate development with growth, and evolve to survive. Among those, what catches my attention is called being locally attuned and responsive, because I feel like this is what I'm lacking right now, how I can be locally attuned and responsive to the environment, at the same time let my own design responsive to the current issues we're facing right now. This is the photo that I took while I explore the environment in Arizona. And this is from the Sinnar Desert Museum that is very near to Tucson, very close to Phoenix as well. And you can see there the a key species called saguaro cactus everywhere. So saguaro cactus are the proud of people in Arizona because it is unique. It is only exists in Arizona. And Sonoran Desert is known for 2 things. First, very extreme high heat during the summer. Second, the monsoon season as well. So how the saguaro cactus benefited from those environment and at the same time survived the very extreme changing of the water volume yearly and also the extreme changing of the environment of the climate. So being locally attuned and responsive is one of the keys for saguaro to survive. And there are 4 sub branches of that principle that saguaro applies and try to survive in the desert. They are leverage psychological process, adapt to changing conditions, use feedback loops, and last but not least, the cultivate cooperation relationship. After observing the organism, after observing the very grand, huge saguaro, and learning about the life principles, I've come up with an idea to develop an installation that helps me to understand the deep patterns behind the mechanism, as well as try to see what kind of issues I can solve. So I start up with building a paper prototype that helps me to first establish an idea of how this installation is going to be like, and also how the people's interaction with this installation. So this is the rendering of how the installation looks like. So the general idea of this installation is to educate people, introduce the people who visit here for the first time to understand what Sonora Desert is and try to explore the seasonal activities of the animals. So First of all, since a graphic designer care a lot about shapes, patterns, so I apply the patterns and shapes of the skin of the saguaro with the curly shapes as well as the shapes of the thorns as if it's a stars from looking from the distance, and try to embed that pattern to one of the display panels that made of iron, which is also sufficient, which is also known for local materials. And then as for the overall view of this installation, it mimicking the outer shape of the cutting view of the saguaro. And the very middle part is the solar panel that collects the energy, and that's mimicking the flowers of saguaro. And how that installation can apply the different life principles that help saguaro to survive. So before I jump into my design, let me do the introduction of those, what are those principles are first. So one of the keys to how saguaro to survive is called the leverage cyclic process. So here is the long-nosed bat. So long-nosed bat is here we go. So long-nosed bat is a cute animal that migrates seasonally from Mexico to Arizona. And the blooming of the flowers of saguaro echoes the migration activities of this bat because this lesser long-nosed bat is the major pollinator for saguaro. Okay, and that is how they saguaro take advantage of this cyclic process of the migration of the animals to help them to prosperous. So I think for as for my design, I would like to apply the content that repeatedly, and to facilitate the stakeholder to apply them repeatedly yearly. So the content is mainly about the seasonal activities of the local animals. So the people who visit here for the first time will understand what happens repeatedly so that they can come here repeatedly. The second one is adapt to the changing conditions. Adapt to the changing conditions here is very important for saguaro because you see the outer shape of the saguaro is formed by the accordion shape. This accordion shape helps saguaro to shrink and expand with the volume of the waterfall. So during the monsoon season, the saguaro will absorb water as much as possible, at the same time expand it as large as possible. So that is when you can see the saguaro is huge, giant, and very heavy. And after the monsoon season, the rainfall volumes falling down. So that is when the saguaro starting to consume the water slowly that is storage during the monsoon season and help them survive the dry season. So that accordion shape gonna help them to shrink down gradually. So that is how they adapt to the changing conditions. The shape helps them to fit the form. So what I'm thinking, how I can apply that principle to my own design is to have the adjustable display boards. So all of the boards are detachable and all of them are reasonable, which means that whenever you want to change the content of your display, you can always just take one board from the display, from the pole, and slide them on, or either slide them like to the other side and then stick them. So even this part is also detachable, which means that if you don't want to play anything during the seasons, then you can just leave them here as a display or as a decorative installation. But if you, during the very busy season, you have a lot of things to display, then they're all available to support your boards. Like as a backbone, you can always slide your display board here on each of the panels. Next is to use the feedback loops. How saguaro use the feedback loops is to change the skin thickness gradually based on the sunlight. So you can see the saguaro cactus here, because it's so super huge, we look from here like this way. But however, after a close observation of these plants, you can see the south facing side of the skin is a little bit thicker than the north facing side because they have the stronger sunlights and more extreme sunlights. So that is how they try to avoid the extreme direct shining of the sunlight. So for me, I think that is a nice way to apply to my own design because I would love to add more interactive elements to it. So in the middle, I add a sensor right here. It's not displayed, and an LED screen that can tracking the visitors' activities. So long as they enter this installation, there will be the silhouettes of animal that coexist with the swallow here as an education to people what species is coexisting with this plant. Last but not the least, how to cultivate a cooperative relationship. So as the key species of the saguaro desert, of the Sonora Desert, saguaro is supporting the local species of over 100 local species, providing them food, habitat, and at the same time, those species helping saguaro to spread. And that is how the saguaro pay back to the community. So for me, I would like people to pay back to our local environment by committing their own environmental saving behaviors. So that is a gesture of how we pledge to the environment protection by donating to the water saving. So after scan the QR code, you can donate whatever amount of money you want. But as a reminder for yourself that desert also needs your help. So besides that, I'm also thinking others a life principle related design that helps this installation to be more interactive. For example, those installed on the pillars are the LED lights that's supported by the solar panels, and they will shine from the bottom to the top, displaying how the saguaro absorbs water. And the solar panel also support also the battery source from this LED screen. And at last, I would also like to interact with other local tourism spots, for example, like the Great Canyon, to encourage people to explore more about the local environment. So that is how I learn from nature. I benefit from nature. I reflect what I learned from nature through my own design reflection. I would love to close my speech today by introducing one piece of poem that I discovered while I was exploring the Sonora Desert Museum. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. Thank you. Our next speaker is Yuxin Qin.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our ASU Symposium today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Yuxin, and today I would like to bring you all to a design journey of time organization with me today. Before I start, I would like to ask you all a question. What's the meaning of time for you? In order to find the answer, I start my research. At first, I start the history of time, and I made a timeline of timekeeping device from ancient to present. In the ancient, we had sundial, water clock, and hourglass, and all of three are inspired by nature. We can see the water, see the sand. However, the interesting thing for me is the hourglass and the mechanic clock was invented at the same time in 14th century. And I checked the history behind that. The mechanic clock was invented for special ceremony events. So when people join those ceremony events, they need a more accurate timekeeping device to help them to join the events on time. And the hourglass is more portable and help them for daily usage. And after that, we start to have a pocket watch, wristwatch, quartz watch, and then we have digital watch. Then I start to think about what is the most common method of telling time today. And according to research, more than 35% of American people, they use their mobile phone to tell the time. And this data is even raising for the young generation, it's 60%, which surprised me a lot. So after I figure out the most popular platform, I start another research. what is the definition of contemporary time? And according to a quote from Oliver, time is a human how invention that controls we work. And some scholars even said that the contemporary time is a symbol of capitalism. I think the answer is very sad for me. Each people have different experience of time, but we have to follow the standardized time to work. So I think for my own time organization design, I would like to make people have a different experience of time and could reflect their own culture. I start to make a list for myself. First, I hope to enhance the relationship between time and nature. Also, enhance the reflection between time and my own cultural background. Last, to enhance the time and human interaction. After that, I try to explore some different ideas of layout design. I tried some different languages from simplified Chinese to traditional Chinese characters and Roman numbers. After that, I start to try some different ways for the numbers to emphasize current time and also to show the movement of time. Then I start to design some animation to see how it works on the iPhone screen. I not only tried the numbers or characters, but also tried some abstract shapes to see if that could help people to have a different experience. However, I found out an issue of the current timekeeping application. For example, like this iOS time application, the good thing is they could allow users to select different languages based on their own cultural background. But however, I found out an issue is whatever the language you choose, you have to work with the Arabic numbers. For some of the case, like the English version, since the English characters contains less strokes, so it works pretty well with the Arabic numbers. However, for the Chinese version and Japanese version, since they contains kanji, is more complex than the English characters, and they are starting to create a very high contrast with the Arabic numbers. So I don't think it works very well, and I don't think this idea reflects my own cultural background very well. I was trying to think about if I could find or invent a new number system for myself. Then I start to look for some inspiration. This gentleman, his name is Alan Chen. He's from Hong Kong. He's a well-known graphic designer. And since he grew up in Hong Kong, he influenced by both Eastern and Western culture. Here, the red poster, the content is his last name, Chen. And this character is composed by two parts. One, the black character is W, and the white one is the Chinese character. The W represent West, and the Chinese character represent East. So those two characters combine together to show his cultural background very well. And he said he always see his culture as a foreign people, as an outsider, in order to find some attractive cultural elements to use in design. And on the right-hand side, here is an interesting clock designed by him. Those 12 characters are simplified Chinese characters, and each of them removed one of the strokes, but he used the minute hand as a stroke. So when the time passed by, the missed stroke will be added. And I'm fascinated by this simple but intelligent idea. Then I start to look for some different ideas. And then finally, I find out an interesting number system is called the Suzhou number. It's from ancient China. And this idea, they only have 10 characters from 0 to 9. And people only use it for commercial purpose. And even now, in some places like Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, some traditional restaurants still use this idea to price their menu. And I think this idea fascinated with me. Either their layout structures from top to bottom, right to left, and their color palette is very helpful for people who need to know the information. However, if I would like to use this idea in my own design, I have to figure out some issue. At first, as you can see on the right-hand side, those characters are based on handwritten, which is hard to read. And also, if I need to use this idea for time telling, I need 60 numbers to represent minutes and seconds. So as a result, I need to, based on those 10 characters, and then develop the rest of them based on those. And I have to simplify them to make it suitable for digital device to be more efficient. Then here is the first version I designed. I make them a fixed stroke. However, there is still an issue I didn't fix for this version. As you can see on the left-hand side, some of the characters, they only occupied half of the frame. And after I tried to use those characters into the layout design, it's a little bit embarrassed for me. It's not very clean. Then I tried my second version. I made all of the characters as the same cap height, the same width, which is more cleaner than before. And those Arabic numbers could help you to understand how it lay out from right to left. Then I started to make an animation to show my ideas. I combined the idea from Suzhou numbers with digital time, because for the Suzhou number, we read from right to left. But for the digital time, we could see the black characters. Those could easily to let people tell the time. And for those people who don't have a deep understanding of Chinese cultural background, they could still understand this idea and learn the idea behind this. And the reason why I use red as a background is because this color represents our culture very well, and the black characters has a strong contrast with the red background. And the small squares covered by each second. After that, I started to try some different mockups to see what are some potential ideas for this design. We could use it in public areas for multiple digital devices to help people see the movement of the time, but also make people feel more related to their own cultural background. In the end, I quoted a poem from ancient China. It means that the flower will bloom again, but people will not be young again. So I hope everyone could appreciate your current time and also have a nice experience in here today. Thank you so much.
Hello. Oh, it doesn't sound like this thing's on at all, but I guess it is on. Hi, everyone. My name is Terresa, and I will be leading the panel discussion. Thank you all so much for your work that you've been, pursuing over your education. I think it's really fascinating to see how y'all's projects developed. And so I wrote some notes on my phone. I'm not texting anyone, so please bear with me. I wanted to make sure I remembered things. So I think I want to ask an overall question for all of you around the limitations for what you all were working on, and what, if any, thing would you love to expand on in your research, or perhaps be able to draw on different types of data. So I'll start, with you, Beatrice.
Sure. Hello. Hi. So just to recall the memory, my project is to how to apply the biomimicry light principles to the design work. So in terms of the limitation of my design is the concept of biomimicry is not that well applied in visual communication design, or we say graphic design. We are very familiar with that concept in industrial design, or we say product design or architecture design, because that is how the publication did and how we know about the functionality of the biomimicry. So my limitation right here is still how to develop the design principles together with the biomimicry light principles. So the visual wise, my installation gonna be more biomimicry besides the functionality. So I hope in the further development of my installation, I can try to dig out more besides Saguaro, because I would love to learn more about the Sonora Desert, like here, the local environment, and try to see what other principles that other organisms in desert apply, and try to see if I can incorporate more from them as well.
Just so I can understand a bit more about your exhibition, do you
Yes.
have thoughts on where it might be, like where it might be situated?
Okay. So just to answer that, so it's supposed to be very flexible because Sonora Desert is a huge area. So that installation aims to help the hikers or the people who first visit here to understand more about the seasonal migration of the animals' activities, as well as to let them to pay back to the desert. So it's supposed to be put wherever the stakeholder or wherever we feel it is necessary to remind people how important they are, like in this environment. So it will not be limited only to this museum or that museum. So that is also why it needs to be developed to be mobile. So when it's necessary, it can be just reassembled, like modularize it, reassembled, and then just to rebuild them somewhere where it's necessary.
So you are thinking about it being in a physical museum location?
Yeah, at first, yes.
Okay.
Just because I explored a lot of museums locally, so that is where that inspiration come from. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So I'm just wondering about limitations in your overall work. So as you move your project forward, or even looking back on what you have completed right now, what are some things that perhaps like other data pools that maybe you wanted to have, or other things that you'd like to include in the future?
Got it. Sorry. I think for me, some of the limitations I had that were a lot of the research that I went about doing, it was hard to find. I could find philosopher information, but I was trying to find other information about friendship, and a lot of it was very specific. So I found like connection through nursing or connection through, whatever. And I was trying to really find not specific, but a little more broad in like information about friendship. So I think that was one of my main limitations, and also of course time. But I think in the future I would, or if I were to continue it, I'd spend more time doing, well, as I talked about, my next steps would be user testing and getting more feedback and adjusting from there. Yeah.
I'm wondering about that in particular, because I did see, as you were showing the philosophers, I'm like, do I relate or see myself in any of these folks? And they're talking about friendship and defining it. I'm wondering, did you at all look at any pop culture references for that? Like, how do you even, for instance, learn about what true friendship actually is? And it wasn't really until you've done this project, I'm assuming, that you're seeing all these philosophers talking about it. But like, how did you learn about it? And I'm wondering, like, was that something you were able to pull from your data as well, or something maybe you'd like to include?
Yeah, I mean, obviously growing up, I learned about friendship because that's, you just become friends with people. But I know throughout this semester, I got a lot of, like, I was able to get a lot of articles about, like, friendship and loneliness and kind of how to maintain friends and how to keep friends. And I was able to look at those and kind of pull from that on my idea of friendship. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
So when I look back to my design project, I feel I spend a lot of time to figure out what's the best way to figure out my design outcome, because I feel time is a very broad topic. But at the beginning, I don't have a clear goal what I will have in the end. So I start to try a lot of different ideas, keep going back and forth. And as I show on the presentation, I tried a lot of different ideas, and a lot of them don't have a strong connection with each other. But I really enjoy in the process, because without those process, I won't able to find out what I want to have in the end. And I felt the most important thing for me is in the end, I finally find myself in this project, because I feel this idea could represent my own culture. But I really hope I could have more time to dig deeper to this project to explore more different possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, with your project, I'm so glad that you mentioned capitalism, because as soon as you said time up on the screen, I wrote down colonialism, control. And so I'm wondering, like, when you talk about this end product that you'd like to create, like, what are sort of your thoughts around, like, how are folks going to use the system that you create? Are they going to, like, use it for good or for evil? Like, is that something that you're thinking about?
Yes, absolutely. Because when I check the history of time in the past, the time is not a tool, it's help people to know their daily schedule, and is based on their what's that called, circadian rhythm. But now it's very standardized. It's not as interactive as before. It's not as playful as before. Uh, Actually, I had a sound for my animation, but for the technical reasons, it doesn't show up. In the past, we could not only see the time, we could also hear the time or even touch the time. But now it's just a digital screen or an analog watch, which is not as interactive as before. But I hope to bring more layers of experience to the audience to make them have a better experience of time. And whether you are a fast paced person or slow paced person is okay. Just follow your step. Yeah.
Okay, I really love that, because I feel like you're kind of pulling back in. When I think about time, I think about the original purposes of, like, when to know to harvest and when to know, you're doing this with family and things like that. So I love that idea. And thinking about, like, indigeneity and that relation to design, I want to go back to Beatrice, to your project. Is there anything that you were learning around that relationship between environment and people through indigenous practices or indigeneity or anything of that nature? And I'm wondering if that's something you might explore in the future.
Yes, excuse me. For me, since even though it's been 3 years, I'm still new to the local environment. So every single step of my design process and also a research process of the local environment is a learning journey. So I feel like even though desert sounds like a very lifeless place, there are so many things hidden behind the surface. So people become the most active one in this silent background. So that is why I feel like we need to focus more on the environment instead of ourselves, because there are something we did benefit from the nature, but somehow we forget what influence we brought to the local environment, and what should we do to pay them back. Like your mind of gratitude is lost gradually somehow during this industrialization process. So that is how I feel like the interaction between the human and nature should be like stronger. They need to be bounding more, especially here in Arizona. Since yes,
and then that really draws off indigenous practices. Living in Minnesota, really understanding that we are not only taking from the environment, but we're giving back to it. And so when you said something in your presentation that reminded me of that, I was wondering if you had explored any of that. Dagny, I'm wondering about let's see, I wrote down a question for you. I'm wondering about the data pool that you pulled from. And a lot of them you said were white female college students, and how pulling from other pools of data or other life experiences and identities could perhaps change your output.
Yeah, I kind of aim towards like 20s to mid 20s because I felt that a big reason why I should mention a big like during that time you're going through a lot of change, and that's like I feel like I've heard a lot of people around mid 20s going through like all struggling because you move it to a new city, or you find new friends, or you can't find new friends because you're in somewhere alone. And so that was kind of my goal of who I was aiming for, but I definitely think that like a different age group or a different like pool of people would change the outcome for sure. Because I think that like if you're like in an older crowd and you maybe would have more activities like, oh, everybody go to um this knitting class or whatever. That's the first thing that came to my mind. You know what I mean? Like it would be come to this community event versus I feel like people who are in their like mid 20s aren't about to just go. They're not. I feel like they're more into just going and doing things whenever. So yeah,
more spontaneous. I was also wondering about like racial makeup too, and how that might change, and also not having a college education, and how that will also change your activities, and also change what you have accessible to you. So just as a consideration on that, on moving forward. But I'm wondering too about the application. You had these QR codes that folks could scan, but I didn't necessarily, or maybe I missed it, but I didn't see like how are folks connecting. Like I think about Pokemon Go. And you're doing it, and that other folks are doing it too. And I'm wondering, I'm going around and I'm still doing this QR code, but I'm still by myself. How are we connecting? How are you thinking about connecting the folks who are scanning QR codes with other folks who are scanning QR codes so that there can be that connection? What were you thinking?
In my head, it was more just like you'd scan it and you'd get the challenge. Like the example I had was that you would ask somebody about like the best part of their day. And so you'd go up to whoever, and if you were around the poster, you can see like other people looking at the poster too. It was more about connecting with like strangers and trying to just gain any kind of connection with anybody. I definitely though, like through variations, one of my variations was thinking about a way to like connect it where you'd have like an app and you could connect with others that with like challenges, but I wanted it to be more about just kind of like in the moment, because in that sense I was, oh, you need to have the app, where I wanted it to be, oh, you can be in a coffee shop or you could be on the street and see it and scan it and just do it then.
Yeah, I was only thinking about like, approaching people who maybe didn't want to be approached or something. But if the poster's there, it would kind of make sense, but okay. Okay, awesome. Let's see. So I really loved the typographic makeup of your project. And I'm wondering, was there a particular typeface that you were looking at when you were trying to create the new number system?
That's a pretty good question. I'm a big fan of typography, and in these years, I look up at the TDC awards. In these years, they are more and more inclusive. Some people they design their own language typeface, and which fascinated with me. So that's one of the reasons why I would like to design my own typeface for the timekeeping device. However, I checked a lot of different resources. There is no typeface to represent this idea. And the original character only have 10 characters, and they are based on handwritten, which is not very helpful for digital device. But I think this idea is working for me. So I decided to revise it based on what they had before, and based on those simplified 10 characters. And then I add more and more components for the rest of characters. The process is not very hard. It's a very simple idea, but I really enjoy it, keep revising it to make it work better and better. Yeah.
I think I understand like the idea of really keeping it geometric for digital devices, but it actually is more accessible to have letter forms that are a little bit more different from each other. So I'm wondering if in the future you might want to explore what it could mean to have some variations in the letter forms. Like I know I've been taught by doing like all these trainings and whatnot that like Comic Sans, even though we hate it as designers, is actually really, really accessible for folks because the letter forms are so different. And so just thinking about that, like I don't think you have to move completely away from the traditional, letter forms. So there might be a way to marry it.
Yeah, thanks for your suggestions. That's very important for me. And for this semester, I'm very glad that I work with my mentor, Professor Weed. He has a very strong background in typography. And since we have very limited time, we think we're supposed to make the character based on optical measurements, but I made it all the same for now. But for the next week, I will continue to work on that. And after that, I will continue to use my own time to revise it. And that will be more and more complex. Even though I'm from China, but I know design Chinese characters is very hard. When I researched for this project, I looked up some interesting typeface. One of them is spent 10 years to design that typeface, and it contains hundreds, thousands of characters, which fascinated with me. But I personally, I hope more and more people could see our culture as an outsider, because we see it every day. It's very easy to ignore it, but somehow I hope them could appreciate what we have. Those ideas is has a lot of designers spend a lot of energy to design on it. Yeah.
Okay. So you have the rest of your life to do your
Yeah.
do your typeface. Okay, so I want to give it up for the panelists. Thank you so much again for your research. It works. All right. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Terresa Moses. I use she, her pronouns. I do a lot in the field of design, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. And we'll go on for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. So thank you all for the invite, for having me here. I appreciate it. And I'm super excited to talk about my work. So I'm an abolitionist, and so I have titled my presentation as such, because what I do, I really have a lot of the abolitionist frameworks and theories sort of as the foundation for the work that I do and I engage with. Before I start any presentation, I like to always make sure I'm moving. Is that okay? I hope so. I like to start off by giving gratitude to past and present Freedom Day fighters and abolitionists, without whose work I would not be here today. I also want to give gratitude to the original stewards of this land, and before colonizers came, who were already here, and before my people were stolen and brought here. So I just want to give gratitude and recognition for them. So I'm here today because first and foremost, I'm an organizer. At the very core of my work, I'm going to be out in community. I'm going to be out at the protests. I'm going to be out with the people to hear what it is the people are needing and wanting, and seeing how my work can fit into that. Secondly, I'm an educator, and I'm an educator in all parts. I feel like sometimes I'm educating people who don't want to be educated. And so I'm an educator as my kind of second personality there. And then I'm a designer. That's like third in my list. I'm a designer and an illustrator. And I use this work to be able to sort of fight against what Bell Hooks calls a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So a disclaimer, I do this work as just me. My own lived experience is what I'm going to be talking about today. I do not have all of the answers. I do have some, but please know there are many, many, many solutions to getting the work done that needs to get done for us to live in a better place. All right, so I've sort of had these categories within this presentation, the first one being to disrupt. Dismantle is the second one, and to destroy. I really love like threes. It just makes me feel really good and warm and tingly inside, even if it has disrupt on the screen, and destroy. So I'll be talking about these three areas, what I do in my own work, hopefully encouraging you all to incorporate some of these things into what you do. So that first one being to disrupt. The first thing we want to look at whenever I'm engaging in any type of work around social change and social justice is to understand where I am at and situate it in the context of where it is that I am at. Oh, okay. You know, it's disrupting me right now. All right. So I'm going to first think about what it means for me to be in the body that I'm in, for me to have access to the money that I have access to, for me to have access to the people I have access to. Your positionality is so many, many, many things wrapped up in what makes you who you are. So that positionality is your identity. I'm going to have a lot of amazing quotes, so you can keep your phones out. This one here is by Bayard Rustin. It says, "It occurred to me shortly after that it was an absolute necessity for me to declare homosexuality, because if I didn't, I was a part of the prejudice. I was aiding and abetting the prejudice that was a part of the effort to destroy me." Bayard Rustin, amazing activist, especially during the civil rights era. And if you will remember correctly, if you were for one movement, say it was the feminist movement, you weren't supposed to be for the Black movement. They really weren't in the idea of really recognizing the intersectionality. And so Bayard Rustin is saying this at a time that wasn't really popular to say this, right? To recognize that there are not just Black people, but there's Black women. Gasp. There are Black queer people. Oh my gosh, I'm three of those things, So recognizing that intersectionality, it muddied the movement, it muddied things that, were already very complicated because of nuance of struggle. And so Bayard Rustin is saying this quote, and I really love this quote because it's starting to recognize the intersectionality. And if you are unfamiliar with that term, that's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who was defending a Black woman for a GM case. She was being discriminated against for both her gender and her race. And GM was trying to argue that that wasn't possible. But, I'm here as a truth to that intersection. So, okay. Here we go. So the ways in which I like to identify and kind of reckon with my own positionality and my own experiences is by using design. Okay. I said I was an illustrator. And so this is one of the ways in which I did that. There is an exhibition that I created. It's called Umbra, which is like the dark side shadow of the moon. And I really wanted to discuss this idea of this intersectionality. Think of these white hands being like that white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, sort of nitpicking and trying to disturb, the experiences of Black women. And so I use this as an opportunity to talk about those different intersections. I had a series of themes. I had 12 pieces total. Here's just a few of them. I'll start with the first one that I actually created for the exhibition before I even knew what it was called. Much like the research process that you all are taking as graduate students, you kind of just start off with this idea. You don't know what it's going to be. And that's exactly how this started. So I really wanted to, I was really upset about the mortality rates, which are still a thing. Black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. And that's really alarming for us to be in a country that we're in. And Black women are dying at 4 times the rate just through a normal childbirthing experience. And so I really wanted to think through what it meant to visualize birthing trauma or being traumatized during the birthing process, having this sort of hand of white supremacy be able to kind of control that or pull the pin on the trauma. So that's what you see there in the red. The one at the very top there, I love this piece. It's been featured in quite a few places, but it's called Impossible, and it was talking about the burden that Black women face. And this piece is particularly interesting because she's holding up this sort of broken, vase, which is supposed to symbolize the system. And then she is trying to create this new one. And oftentimes you'll see Black women like myself. I'm the Director of Design Justice for the College of Design at the University of Minnesota. And so we really are kind of tasked with some of these roles of holding up the broken system or being in this broken institution while simultaneously being tasked to create something that's brand new, that isn't broken, that like is sparkling and it works well. So that's kind of the position that we're in, and it's impossible, right? Especially without support. Here at the bottom in the blue, I'm talking about the religious institutions and their control over women's bodies. And then over there at the far right-hand side, I can't just only talk about struggle. In my work, I have to have moments of joy. And so I talked about liberation and what it meant to kind of be free. So it's like an illustration of this Black woman in her, glory in her body. And so I talked about these 6 different areas within the exhibition. You can go to umbraexhibit.com if you'd like to see all of the pieces. But gaze, control, savior, danger or anger, burden, and liberation. And within these same 6 themes, not only am I thinking about like the visual process, but also, thinking back to the exhibition that we just heard about earlier, how are folks engaging with those materials? How are they using tactile ways of remembering what it is that you're trying to show them? So in the category of gaze, that theme there, this is where it was great to have all of my white friends. I brought them all in to have them sit in front of a 360 camera and just stare into it. So then when you put on the VR set, you got it on and all you could see were these white people staring at you. And so it really was just a reflection of folks trying to understand what does white gaze mean? What does it mean to walk into a room and be like the only person of color? And just to be in front of all of these white folks who are kind of staring at you like you don't belong. And so that was what that category was about. Oh, sorry. It's okay. Something's wrong with the HDMI? Mm-hmm. Do you want to try another port?
Yep.
I mean, I try like a... Okay. All right. When anything like wrong happens, it could be technology, it could be like a wrong, order at McDonald's. I always say it's racism. So that's what that is, racism. All right. So the second category was control. And so I had these blocks that had painted racism, classism, and sexism on them. And folks had to try and control how the mannequin, the Black woman, was to hold all 3 of these things in burden. The third area was savior, really talked about white tears. And so I had a tissue box there that people could just grab their tears instead of asking Black women to hold them. The next category was danger or anger. And I was just screaming into a mic and you had to listen to it. So that was pretty awesome. The 5th category was burden. And it was one of those vests, those weighted vests that you use for working out. I took the weights out of them and sort of painted on the words, these elements of racism and sexism that Black women face. And by the time you were to put them back into the vest, you'd have like an additional 50 pounds. That was sort of like a physical representation of burden. And then the last one was on liberation. So I had Legos there and people were able to like craft and work together to create something, a world in which Black women could actually live in freedom and be liberated. So this is what the exhibition, a photo of what the exhibition looked like. You can see on there too that I had sort of these 2 ways of looking at each piece and a description for each of them. So if you were a Black woman, you looked at the top of the black area and you read that and it was like a really validating thought. And then the bottom part was for everyone else who wasn't a Black woman. And it really talked about how you can either add to the harm or the healing of the Black woman's experience. And that's the umbraexhibit.com scan code. All right, so my whole purpose in talking about that exhibition in particular is that identity really matters. And it matters because of everything that we're going to output, everything we're going to put into the world as designers, we have to be aware of the positionality that we embody, so that when we're putting something out there and we're saying it's for everyone, that we are actually are considering everyone. And if we aren't, that we're self-aware of what are the reasons why that might be. You know, it could be cost, but it could also be our own bias. And that's a really, really important part to the decisions that we're making as designers. Marsha P. Johnson says, we have to be visible. We should not be ashamed of who we are. This is important even to the privileges that we have. We have to be able to talk about those things so that we can begin to create and shift the world into the way that we know it should be for everyone. One of the ways in which I do that is by looking at Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem. Now I'm a designer, so of course I redesigned it. But these are her words. And so I really encourage folks to go look this up and find out, you know, if you are interested in social change, what are the areas in which I, you know, can exist in that. I'm definitely a builder, making connections in that way, but also a disruptor. That's like one of my main personalities in this ecosystem of change. Another quote here by W.E.B. Du Bois. It says, "Thus all art is propaganda and ever must be. I do not care a damn for any art that is used for propaganda, but I do care when propaganda is confined to one side while the other is stripped and silent." And I like this quote because I think it really speaks to sort of the side job to my side job. So Blackbird Revolt is my design studio. We do work based in social justice and anti-racism and Black liberation and abolition, all of those things that we value. And when I started the business, I was literally thinking, I'm just going to start like a little side like t-shirt thing. What could I wear to the next protest was really my concern. I was like, let me just create it. And so, you know, we do t-shirts, you know, we do that type of stuff. Of course, our bigger is part of the business is going to be our clientele. And the folks that we work with, and we really are excited to work with. But yeah, that's you know, us embodying that quote, right? We know that even our very existence, me as a Black woman walking into this institution, is a piece of propaganda, right? It is something that is radical and revolutionary. And so why not have something that says, you know, abolish the police on my shirt, you know? Another quote here that I live by in the business is from James Baldwin. It says, "Artists are here to disturb the peace." And I think that really speaks to me as a disruptor. And so, you know, I live in Minneapolis. I've lived there since 2020. Before that, I was in Duluth, Minnesota. So all the stuff that was happening in Minneapolis was still hitting us very, very hard. And as a way to do that, I started to process by creating some typography. So one of the things I like to make sure that folks know is that in 2020, George Floyd was murdered, which I feel like, you know, everyone knows. I feel like that's the Great Awakening. People are like, oh my gosh, racism exists. And we're like, yeah, we've been saying it. But folks don't know is the year after that, Daunte Wright was murdered. The year after that, Amir Locke was murdered, and there have been countless other murders in Minneapolis since then. As an abolitionist, this you know, issue is very, very near and dear to me. Oftentimes with a very like one connection or even a direct connection with the victims of police brutality. And so it's a way for me to be able to process all the things that were happening within my own city and my own backyard. I started to create and craft typographic messaging. And so this is what I mean by the fact that being in community is super, super, super important. And that's because I wouldn't know any of these things had it not been for me being out there on the front lines, me knowing that protesters needed us to bring supplies for me to do what I'm going to talk about next. So at the murders of Daunte Wright, we were out there in Brooklyn Center in front of the precinct. If you are familiar at all with any weather in the Midwest, right now it's like 36 degrees in Minneapolis. So the 2 weeks before that, I promise you it was like 80, 85. So you can think it's going to be warm all day, and then the next day it's like snowing, and it's really, really weird. And that's that time when Daunte Wright was murdered. And so as we were bringing supplies over to protesters, oftentimes we had to make sure that folks had hand warmers, that they had foot warmers, that they had umbrellas for tear gas, all kinds of stuff for protection. And one of the other ways that you make sure that you're protected, especially from police targeting, is that you are all dressed similarly. that you all are wearing the same thing, so that whenever I go to a restaurant, 2 hours after, or I'm hanging out somewhere 3 hours after the protest, that someone can't come and recognize me and say, oh, that's the one that had blue hair. She was up there doing da 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 da. And so it's really important for us to all look succinct. And I think design has a really unique role to play in that, because we already know how to brand something. We already know how to market something and to create messaging or to unify messaging. And that's what I was doing with this project. I'm gonna let y'all continue that and get that together. So I got some cool slides coming up. But yeah, it was really cold. It was really damp. It was a weird time to be there. And one thing you want to do is make sure that you're wearing the same thing. And so me and the other organizers that were there, we were like, why don't we just have hoodies for folks? Because people bring their kids out. People are cold, but they don't want to leave because, you're bigger in mass. You have more power. And so we were like, what if we just bring some hoodies out, get folks that wear the same thing. We're in a black hoodie. So I worked with a screen printer out of Duluth, who we already had partnership with. And we were like, hey, we need these in like 48 hours. Can you get these to us? And so I sent over the type and they printed it on hoodies for us. And so we passed out almost 3,000 of these. And so, it's very hard for police to, recognize us when there's a ton of people wearing the same thing. One thing that's also super important about this is that people are not construing what we're saying. This photograph was taken back in 2021. You still know what it is that I'm standing for, right? You still know exactly what it is that I'm trying to say. And the media, can't construe at all our messaging. And that was one of the ways that type could really, live on. Not only did we create the Stop Killing Black People saying, but we worked with community members to see what it is that folks were talking about. People over property was a big one, especially in 2020, when folks were really trying to value a freaking target over the lives of Black and brown people. And so that was a saying that we printed. Black Lives Matter, abolish the police, all sayings that I would not have known anything about had I not been at the front lines or in with my community when these things were happening. I just love this shot, like the juxtaposition between, this typography and what it stood for and the militarization of police. I just think that's like just a really amazing shot. And these were, of course, these were used by all kinds of media outlets. Again, folks not being able to construe what we were saying. Stop killing Black people. That's what we're fighting for. Black Lives Matter. Used on the front of newspapers. We printed it on buttons. So really reflecting back on what was already existing in the civil rights era. They did the same things. They printed things on buttons. They printed things on posters, and we made sure to get these professionally printed so that they weren't melting in the snow and the rain. And then Common came up to us on the 1-year memorial of George Floyd's murder, and took a t-shirt and wore it on stage. That was really cool. But also, again, a few years later, still can't misconstrue what it is that he's talking about. You don't know what he's saying on this mic, but you do know what he stands for and his values. Also, folks then took the type and sort of, kind of crowdsourced, like used it for, their other things that we were doing in the city. I have a sign maker here that's a good friend of mine. Started to paint them on big canvas signs and throw them outside of police precincts. That was pretty cool. Business owners would take them and print them and put them on their walls. Fashion Week happened shortly after that, and folks were taking them and painting them onto their creations. So it was a really, really amazing way to see how the typography was created from community, birthed out of that, and then being used with other community members. And so, yes, the type is now available after so much complaining from you designers. It is now available for folks to be able to download. I made the full alphabet. I got cool messaging in there. I had to. And, yeah, you can use this. Again, not for your birthday parties, but for abolishing the police, right? Okay, Audre Lorde says, we are powerful because we have survived, and that is what it is all about, survival and growth. And we have done a lot of surviving. I'm so sorry for that. We have done a lot of surviving, and we are more powerful because of it. One of the ways that y'all are here, even here at this institution, is because of education. Right? We want to be able to grow our box of knowledge so that we can move forward in a more intelligent way, in a smart way, right? And so it's really, really important for us to continue to increase our education. That's only going to increase us understanding our positionality as we think about the work that we're doing. One of the things that we did during 2020 was we were approached by a lot of white folks wondering how they could enter the movement, how they could support the work that we were doing. And we said, okay, let's craft something specifically for them. And so we made this zine called Opera, and it has 10 different areas that folks are able to activate to be able to, center Black lives, center abolition, center liberation in their work. And so this is available for free. You're just paying USPS for it. But yeah, we tried to make sure to use design to, again, educate the masses, and that's available. Here's a reading list of things. So no, I'm not necessarily getting a ton of inspiration from the work that I do from a ton of designers. It is really important for us to understand the whole system of where we live and where we exist. And I do a lot of that from folks who have been doing this work for a very, very, very long time, who are not necessarily designers, but we can take what it is that the education that they have and be able to use that in the work that we do as designers. So I have this list up here for folks if you are interested in growing a little bit more into this work. Here's some amazing works that have really changed my lens and my perspective on design. Also, when we are considering, that disrupting, we need to make sure that we're listening to folks like myself, folks who are, doing this work, folks who have marginalized identities. We need to watch what our politicians say. If they say they're going to forgive student loans, we need to be looking at them during the next election cycle. Like, why is that not happening? So make sure that we're being very watchful. James Baldwin says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Oftentimes, this work is really uncomfortable. It's really hard. Don't always want to engage in it. Don't always want to talk about it, because then it means we have to admit that we gain some sort of benefit from these horrible, horrible oppressive systems, but we can't change it until it's faced. So I just want to encourage you all to begin to face it. But I remain very, very hopeful. A mutual friend of ours, George, Antoinette Carroll, she says, like all systems of oppression, inequity, and inequality are by design. Therefore, they can be redesigned. And I think the folks who are in this work remain in this work because we do have hope that we can change things. And I do believe that. So when we talk about this next area, dismantling is really just about taking apart. That's what dismantling is. We're taking apart. So now that we've kind of disrupted, our previous thoughts and values and understandings about the world around us, now let's take it apart, dismantle it, really start to dive into the certain areas and pieces and places. So James Baldwin here says, freedom is not something that anyone can be given. Freedom is something people take, and people are as free as they want to be. So we have a lot of resources available to us, especially you all being college educated. We have a lot of knowledge bases, and we're only as free as we want to be. So I'm pushing you right now that you don't know it all yet. So continue searching, continuing reaching out to people so that you can understand where you might begin to create change. One of the ways in which I think about that quote is by shifting focus. I know, folks, if you're in this work, you heard a lot around decolonization, decolonizing pedagogy, decolonizing this, decolonizing design, all of these things. So decolonization is really deconstructing settler-imposed systems which oppress those who hold marginalized identities. So that's just the first step. We really want to continue to move on so we can get to liberation. So that second step is not just decolonizing, but decentering those normalized dominant stories, and really start to value folks of color, start to value disabled folks and queer folks and trans folks. If we were to look at history, we might think as an alien coming to Earth that Black people and queer people and disabled people didn't start to exist until the 1900s, which we know are not true, right? And so really decentering some of those things using some amazing techniques I'll talk about in a second. And then really moving into that liberation. So what does it look like for us to all have that transformational healing and protection and safety and creative freedom? One of the frameworks that I created called Racism Untaught with my colleague, Lisa Mercer, went to grad school together at the University of North Texas. And what we did is we looked at how educators use their classroom to be able to talk about some of these really hard concepts. So we decided we really wanted to create a framework that would help folks in understanding that you can talk about this, even if you are not an expert. I am not an expert. on racism at all. But, you can begin to talk about these things, because if you wait for the Black professor to do it, you've been waiting for a long time. So it's up to all of us to collectively work together to start to talk about these topics so we can craft futures and design futures that are liberating for all of us. So that's what Racism Untaught is about. It's about using the design research process to be able to create anti-racist and anti-oppressive design approaches. So when we talk about racialized design, we talk about that being design that perpetuates elements of racism. One of the three categories in which we've defined design, one being an artifact. So Black archetypes in food packaging. It's not new. Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, we can probably name off quite a few. And these are all things that perpetuate this idea that Black people are in subservient roles to white folks in their homes. And so that is an artifact, a racialized artifact. A racialized system, we saw this a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? We saw probably articles of folks and their families being kind of split up. Kids were sitting outside Starbucks trying to log into Wi-Fi. Families only had one laptop, so only the parent could log into work. Those are all systemic disparities, and they oftentimes are affecting Black and brown and low economic status folks. The third category here in design is going to be racialized experience. And if you're a person of color sitting online or sitting here in the audience, I am sure that you have heard any of one of these questions. Where are you really from? What are you? All of these things perpetuate this idea that we do not belong in the space that we're currently inhabiting. So like I said, we use the design research process. We've changed the back ends, so the beginning and the end steps. Instead of empathy, we change that to context, because we believe empathy runs all the way through. If we wait to start the design research process with empathy, and we're waiting for everyone to empathize with racism, we're going to be waiting a long time. So we're going to say you can build it over time, but if you can build some context, let's start there. And then we move all the way through the design research process. And at the end, instead of saying test, we are measuring impact, right? It's not about good intentions. It's about the positive impact that we're making. So this is what the first iteration of the toolkit looked like back in 2018 when we started. Here's what it looks like after a 16-week undergraduate course. See, I assigned Aunt Jemima Uncle Ben's to them, and they were to create anti-racist approach packaging course. Here's what the toolkit looks like now. And as we have our book coming out in October, we'll have the toolkits ready for folks to be able to purchase and use on their own. And they're used for everyone. This is at the end of a 8-hour workshop with 60 real estate agents. We work with social workers. We work with a ton of different organizations to help them to begin to think about racialized design and creating those anti-racist approaches. How am I on time? Oh, I'm good. Okay. We had to move everything online, just like everybody else. So this is what our online platform looks like. So when we do workshops, many of our workshops are going to be online using the workboard in this way. We still have all those cards available to them and all those good things. George is like, I don't even know if I'm using a presentation during my keynote. Okay. All right. So I love this quote. Again, a person who is not a designer. This is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, Alicia Garza. And she says, if we perpetuate the same dynamics that we aim to disrupt in our movements for change, we are not interrupting power. We are not creating change. We are merely rebranding the same set of practices and the same dysfunctions. This is, again, not a designer. You see how much you can learn from non-designers? This is amazing. Yeah, and that's one of the things that we wanted to do with Racism Untaught, is to disrupt that design research process that usually only centers the dominant culture, right? White, cisgender, Christian, male. And we really wanted to make sure that we're being intentional about the design interventions that we have at each of those steps, so that folks are thinking through the decisions that they're making as we move along that process, that iterative process. All right, final and last category is destroy. I kind of wish I had like an echo. Destroy. And one of the ways in which I do that, I kind of already alluded to this earlier when I talked about history. And what I'm doing, I'm also right now getting my PhD. I keep throwing little things in there like they're not a big deal. So I'm like all but dissertation now, confirmed on Monday. Thank you very much. And so I am looking at Black liberation and how to center teaching graphic design from a foundational level using that lens of Black liberation. And one of the ways in which I do this is by creating curriculum that is counter storytelling. And so, if I'm assigning a Photoshop project and we're merging photos, can we talk about telling the real story of the founding of America by looking at, different photos from the Smithsonian and be able to merge history in such a way that actually tells the truth of the founding of the country. So that's the ways in which I do that. And I push you all to look at, again, those other stories that are not being told, really start to investigate what's not being said. The way in which I do that through another project that I actually took out of my graduate experience is called Project Natural. And what this project was meant to do was to look at Black women, natural hair, self-identity, and find ways in which Black women could feel more confident. I like to throw in also that it was just passed, I think it was earlier this year, in Minnesota, the Crown Act, which means that Black women are no longer going to be discriminated against in their professional jobs for the way that their hair naturally grows out of their head. We're in 2023, so just remind y'all of where we're at. And the fact that this actually went up nationally and it didn't pass last year. So there are only a few states that have actually adopted this, and so, crafting this project meant a lot to me as someone who has natural hair. I have my hair straightened right now. Well, as straight as she wants to be, but I have her straightened right now. But like as someone who, oftentimes wears an afro, being able to feel confident in that, requires a lot of connection with my own community, connection with people who are often outside of my own institution, because I am one Black professor out of 80 in my whole college. And so being able to, live this experience, but having to craft certain spaces, that's what Project Natural was about. And so I wanted to create illustrations. I call them my mannequin heads here, all wearing different natural hair styles to show the versatility of natural hair, because chemical relaxers, which was pushed on us as a way of assimilating into whiteness, is very dangerous for us. There's a lot of symptoms outside of that. Fibroid tumors is caused from using chemical relaxers. Alopecia, all kinds of very dangerous things for us. And so being able to create these posters showing, hey, our hair is actually really versatile, but then also being able to have quotes from other Black women that I interviewed and talked to about their natural hair journey, having data there to back it up so that they feel like this is a legitimate thing, right? So the folks are seeing, themselves being able to maybe make that first step. So the first set of posters that I did was 12. I wanted to use natural textures found in nature, because there's 188 different hair textures in the Black community. And so to pick like one just felt kind of wrong. So I wanted to just go outside of that. And the first one I used was feathers. You can probably see it the easiest in this high puff illustration here. And the second set of posters that I did, again, all different hairstyles. And now this is 24. And I use leaves for the silhouettes. And again, those quotes up there are pretty awesome. Most Black people wanted their hair to be permed. I feel like there's a movement now, but definitely during the time we wanted our hair to be straight like white people, and a lot of Black women, when they're coming up to this poster and they're seeing that quote, they're like, yeah, that was me. And so being able to have that validation is super, super important to make a life choice to have, to wear your hair naturally and know that you might be, subject to ridicule and even, not being able to get employed. And then the third set of posters that I did, I really tried to focus on kids and, the experiences that they were having. And the silhouettes that I used, you really can't see it that great, maybe in this one, but I used flower petals. So again, still having, the quotes here to relate with community, but then being able to use these in the setup of the space and the symposiums that I had. And the symposiums, again, thinking about the full experience when you are designing, not just a poster up on a wall, but what am I doing with the whole experience? And so I had people come in teaching folks how to braid. Oftentimes, we didn't know how to do that. So bringing folks in, I love these shots of these little girls learning how to braid and twist and do their own hair. It's such an empowering thing, especially when the world is set up to not even have your hair product or your makeup shade in the store. And so, we set up this symposium. We had these posters on the walls, kind of set up the space and know that they're going to be empowered, but also had all of these activities for folks to engage with. And then we did I'm kind of scared now to show the little video. We did a hair show. It was kind of like a fashion show, but a hair show. So hopefully, cross our fingers, it works. Okay, so no sound. That's okay. Oh, there we go. All right, anti-racism was on our side. It played the whole way through. Okay, so as you can see, the background in the video, you saw some of the posters hanging up on the wall there. But yeah, really being able to think through how does design not only play a role in like the beautiful posters that you're going to create as designers, but then the experience that folks are having. All right, one little nugget of wisdom that I'd like to bestow upon you is this idea of freedom, and liberation, and understanding that there is so much freedom in the gray area. When you begin to think about design as not being right or wrong, not being good or bad, but really showing up to the table, to the design table with community, with the folks there that it is actually affecting, and understand that there is so much nuance and intersection in our experiences, which will impact the output. It's going to be so freeing for you. So I just want to put that out there when you are thinking about creating something, that you continue to think about it being an iterative thing, that you want to continue making changes to it, past deadlines, but understanding that there is a lot of freedom in the gray area of life and identity. And then lastly, we really want to make sure that whenever you are stepping into this work, that you remain committed to it. Staying committed to it requires a lot of things, right? You need to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Self-care is a really, really important thing. It's not just a trendy word that folks are saying, but to remain committed to this work, finding out, where it is that you can best give your gifts, but remain committed to it. And I'll leave you with this quote from Audre Lorde that says, what we must do is commit ourselves to some future that can include each other, and to work toward that future with the particular strengths of our individual, identities. I'm kind of bringing that full circle from what we talked about earlier with our positionality, understanding who we are, where we are situated in the context of wherever it is that we're at, whatever it is that we're designing, and being able to craft something that works with all of our particular strengths. So remember in your work to disrupt, dismantle, and destroy. Disrupt the status quo. Dismantle these systems of oppression, and destroy everything, because nothing's working right now. So please be comfortable in doing all of that, and all of it for our own collective liberation. Thank you all so much. So I wanted to open it up for Q&A. We already have a dead battery. It's racism. Anybody out here have a question
bring the mic around if anyone has a question. I have one.
We can totally share this mic right now. Okay.
So
All right.
I really resonate a lot with all the things that you're saying. And I was surprised, but not surprised that you're one of 80 people in your institution or in your school who is Black. And I that, and also being super appreciative of the context aspect of your work and thinking about how design really is integral into building culture. So I'm curious to know, as an educator myself, how has your institution either embraced or how have they responded to your work and what you're trying to do? Because I'm sure that a lot of it bleeds into not only the communities outside of the institution, but within it also.
Okay, so this one feels loud. Okay. Yeah, I think the institution really has really, I was about to say it has been very supportive, but I don't think it has a choice, to be very honest, especially right now when DEI is really being attacked nationally. But also I think it's the person that they hired. Like I'm a disruptor. I am going to call it out. And I'm from the South, so I don't play that whole little Midwest stuff that they do up there, that passive stuff. But so I'm going to be very frank about it. And they kind of, don't have a choice, to ignore me. But I am a different personality than a lot of folks. Like that's a lot of weight still. And I have to really take care of myself. And I do that by being strategic about who I'm aligning myself with. So I would say I wouldn't say like the institution overall is like, oh yes, like we're super, super supportive. I do think they are because of the results that they're seeing from the work that I'm doing. But I would say I find the most support with those relationships that I'm building with folks who are really into my work and want to align their own values and vision with the work that I'm doing. So I would say there are a lot of individual folks who are wanting to be supportive. The money's not always there, but I would say that's like a really big value for me, is to know that there are folks there that are supporting the work that I'm doing.
Terresa, I have another question for you. First of all, your work is so meaningful and impactful. So I really love what you showed us today. It's very inspiring. And my question to you is, I'm an educator as well, and we tackle different problems in our studio, social issues. Generally, the students sometimes choose their own topics, but the conversation always comes up. Do we have to go straight to policy change? Do we have to change the world before we can do something ourselves? Because whatever we're doing doesn't have an impact enough. But could you speak to the notion of the individual being able to make a change rather than having the whole system changed, which is impossible to do for one person anyways?
Absolutely. Well, I think that's why I started off with the whole positionality aspect of the work. That's the first thing. That's the foundational thing. And I think once you start to tackle that, you become really comfortable with saying sorry. I will say, because we're going to mess up, right? We're going to continue. We're going to say the wrong things. But when you start the work and understand, like, here's where I'm situated in my areas of power and privilege and marginalization, that's the important piece, because you can't do any of the other things. We see that right now. We see the politicians who have not done the work, and they're over here trying to change policy. It's because they don't even understand where they are situated in this power structure and the culture and the institutional levels of oppression that they're even existing in. And so we see that now. And so don't be like that, right? Really focus on that foundational positionality and understand that you're not going to get it all in a class, like in an 8-hour training. Like that's just not going to happen. It is a constant journey. One of the activities that we do oftentimes in our workshops for racism and taught is we think through what different identities that you have and which ones do you think about the most, which ones show up for you. And I always put on there ones I don't have to think about, which is this system of ableism and how I say I don't have to think about it. I think about it constantly now because I do this work, but think about it in the way where I don't have to call a new doctor's office to make sure that they have an elevator because I'm able-bodied. And so understanding that's a place of privilege for me and that I actually am benefiting off of the design of our society because I am able-bodied puts me in a whole different perspective when I'm thinking about disability and disability rights. And so I wouldn't be able to even think about disability and disability rights had I not started at least doing the work and understanding where my powers and my privileges lied in my own identity. And so I would say, don't go and try to change the world because oftentimes then we disassociate from the world that's right around us and the circle of influence that we have because folks are like, we need to go and save the starving children in Africa and there are starving children right outside this institution, right? And so making sure that we are doing the personal work and really trying to localize before we get big is going to be super important to your process as designers. Absolutely.
Hi.
Hello.
I just had a question. I was really inspired and appreciated all of the different mediums and formats that your work comes in, from posters to that whole symposium to the t-shirts. And I wonder what it's like to collaborate with the owners of like the print shops or the place where you're renting and how you decide and how you go about finding people that share your values that are willing to support you in that way.
Absolutely. So remember in the social change ecosystem, I said my two positions are builder and disruptor. And they work really well together because I disrupt, but I disrupt in such a way where it's like I take the system of colonialism and all the knowledge that people have and the big words they like to use, and I come and I throw it back in their face, right? And so I come to the table very, very informed about what the issue is. And I think that really helps me in building relationships and building trust because people are like, oh, you care enough not to just be like, I'm Black and I'm like oppressed, but I'm Black and here are the ways in which oppression shows up for me. And that having that extra level, again, understanding that personal positionality, I think is really what helps me to be intentional about the words that I'm using, what I'm saying. If I'm doing an event or I'm trying to raise money for something, I'll make a deck real quick, and I'll do it like overnight. So when I come to the next organizing meeting, people are like, how did you? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I got passionate, I stayed up, and I did it. But it's because of my information and my knowledge base that I'm able to talk about those things very clearly and then come to the table. And then folks are like, okay, you know what you're talking about. I'm going to support you. I'm writing this check. And so that building comes from experience. That did not start off like that. I did not come out of college being like, I'm going to be a social justice warrior. No, I was going to create symposiums for Black women. And that's all I knew. And it's only because I continue to push myself and surround myself with other folks that will push me that I'm able to talk about oppression off the cuff really quickly if somebody asks me about it. But it's that knowledge base that really helps me able to do that and gain support of folks. Yes, there's a question back here. Oh, right here too.
First of all, I just wanted to say your whole presentation was an inspiration to not only people of color, but like everyone here. And I feel really lucky to have, experienced that. So thank you. And my question is, as a designer, because you said it was like you have like 3 parts, but as a designer, like focusing on that part or that aspect of you, how do you deal with like retaliation? Not as like a protester, but like as a designer, how would you deal with like negative feedback or people retaliating or say like it offends a certain type of group? Like how do you deal with that when your intentions were like pure and innocent?
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question because it's very multi-layered. One thing I think helps is that I never will think about my intentions first. I think that is something that colonialism and white supremacy culture has taught us to do, that but if you were going out for a just cause, it doesn't matter the harm that you put on people. So I think for me, I know people always like, you're not supposed to say that you're humble, but like doing this work, I think automatically puts you in this bucket of gaining more drops of water in your bucket of humility, And so I think if people were to come and say something about my work, I don't think I'd be like, really combative. Like, I want to listen and know. Now, if they're coming because they don't want to be called out for their privilege, then I'm about to go off and it's about to be fun. But I don't necessarily think I have so many of those issues, only because I'm doing the work with so many people. I'm never really in my own room, in my own space, creating something and then bloop, Umbra appeared. No, I talked to so many Black women about that and showed so many pieces before I even released that stuff. And that's where I get the feedback, and that's where I want the feedback, right? Is like, before I release this, I want to make sure that I'm doing this thing right. I'm trying to think of a scenario in which this maybe might have happened to me. So I'm thinking about the use of the word woman and spelling it with an X. And so I was doing that for a while, and some folks got offended by that. Like, we don't want to differentiate woman and trans woman and all this. And so really just, it wasn't a big deal. It's a letter. Like, for me, I'm just like, it's not, this huge thing that I have to change about myself for me to admit that I'm wrong. And I will say 10 years ago, I would not probably have said that answer, because as a designer, you're taught that you're right. You're creating the thing. You're the expert. You're creating something. It's beautiful. You better like it. I'm going to stuff it down your throat. And that's just not how I feel anymore. And so, I'm happy to change it. I'm happy to make whatever it is that folks would make them feel more included in the work. And that's the whole purpose. And I feel like having that as the purpose and being like, yeah, I just got to change a letter, or I just got to, add a color, it's in the big scheme of things, it's really not a lot. So I really welcome it. I really don't have any type of animosity toward anyone who wants to come in and challenge my beliefs, because I want to grow too. So that's that lifelong learner thing, I think. Is there a question back here?
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, thank you very much for your for this talk and all of your projects. So I did a little bit Googling, and then I took a look at the websites for your projects. And I think they're super amazing. Thank you very much. So I just want to ask, will you be able to share some stories about how your projects have been influencing the local communities of yours?
So other than the Stop Killing Black People, that was a big influence. Using that typography, I feel like it's one of those things. Someone interviewed me once, and I said the movement. We need to brand the movement. Like, the movement needs a uniform. That's what I said. The movement needs a uniform. And so I'm happy to be that vessel of design that could somehow brand a movement that has so many layers to it. But I would say that's definitely one. Again, being super localized in not only me progressing forward as a human being, but also in the work that I do. Another thing that's going to be super impactful is making sure to center Black liberation and Black joy in my work. I will say I have kind of made a shift. Like the project that I did for Opera, that zine that kind of informed white folks of how to step in and help. That takes a lot out of me. And so really being able to center doing social justice work into something that's going to also fill me up is going to be super important. So one of the ways I do that is, again, last year, I organized for the first time the Juneteenth celebration for the university, and I raised a lot of money. They weren't happy about how much money I raised, because I went about it and I just went and asked all the deans, hey, can you write a check? And now, this year, because they know I'm a go-getter, they just wrote me a big check, and I'm like, thank you, this year. But that would be another way, it's like how can I pay more Black people to vend food? How can I pay more Black creatives and artists? When people come and they sign up for Juneteenth to table at our event, we're not going to charge you a fee. I'm going to give you a $50 gift card for showing up on time and setting your table up. So I'm trying to really reverse, what capitalism and white supremacy and colonialism has told us that we're supposed to do for certain things. So I would say that's really the way. That's one of the ways. A couple of ways that I really try to localize my impact on community is by celebrating Black joy, crafting events like that, and kind of not taking shit from anybody, honestly.
I just have one last question. I think I do a lot of work in the community also, and
I'm curious to hear from your point of view. I know my work takes a lot of time, and I wonder how your experience of time in a design project or in your work impacts like the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, if that makes sense.
It does. So with that Stop Killing Black People, that project moved super fast because, boom, someone's murdered. You don't plan for that. So there's a lot of work that I do, especially around abolition, that is going to be very reactive. And so that work is going to move by really, really quickly. But I think, again, having the thought in your, like a foundation that everything you're going to create is an iterative thing. And so understanding that, okay, we can get things printed, but we can also get things changed. Or do we need to get things printed? Can we do it digitally? So if we do need to make a change, they scan the QR code and it just goes to a different document or something, And so really trying to be creative in how we publish work has been super helpful, especially if things are very quick and reactive. I was thinking like, what could be the worst thing? Like Stop Killing Black People. And I like misspelled, something, okay, I would just get them reprinted, right? Or something like that. But just really having that understanding that everything is iterative and finding other ways to engage folks with your work could allow for more room and space and time. We talked about time earlier, this really colonial aspect of time and being able to kind of work around that. So I try to do workarounds similar to that so that I can make changes if they are necessary. But like I said, it's really that foundation of working with other people, and not making the decisions on my own that really safeguards what I do. So.
And I would love to ask the last question for the focus on the students who are in this room, who are just about to graduate in a few days. And in
Congratulations.
yeah, big time. In your presentation, you had quite a lot of inspirational ideas of what designers can do. And you talked about how impactful work can be if it's put through the right process with empathy and locally attuned. But are there any last kind of tips or wishes that you have for the future generation of designers of how they should engage in this world as designers from your perspective?
Absolutely. So as a designer, you all know design is kind of the way that I was taught design was it's kind of the commercial art. And being the commercial art is an inherent connection to capitalism. And I'll even say that being in the institution that I'm at, the academic institution is flawed in more ways than I can count. And I still have to work there. So finding the balance is going to be super, super key for you all moving into your own areas. I would always say to make sure you have a little side, and it doesn't have to be a hustle, a side way of expressing your own truths, your own passions, your own things that you would like to see changed in our society, in our community. Always have an outlet for that. Do not allow your position to dictate who you are. Don't allow your company to dictate what your values are. Still be very intentional about that and those decisions that you're making and where you're moving in society in that regard. But I would say really, really making sure that you have your own outlet and your own people. That's really, really going to be intentional for your growth as designers. So don't stay stagnant. Continue. Like we talk about the iterative design process. Think of your own character as an iterative thing. You should constantly be learning. You should constantly be taking the newfound knowledge that you have, applying it to your own self, and then boom, you're a new brand, next season or whatever. So please be intentional about your own growth and iterations of yourself, and then make sure you have that side passion. Do not, you will just get burnt out being in the commercial industry. So make sure that you have something where you're able to invest that passion for a community that I know you all have. Thank you.